Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. A lot of news going on for you today. The Democratic darling Beto O'Rourke raised an amazing $6.1 million in one day. And is that going to have an impact on Joe Biden? Well, we'll talk about that with David Brody. And snowmelt from the so-called bomb cyclone has been flooding the Midwest. Nebraska is under a state of emergency. The river is crested at, I think, unimaginable heights. And even a United States Air Force base is underwater. It's just amazing what's happening. But we'll be talking in another few days about what's happening in California, because when that snow melt from the Sierras comes down, the flooding is going to be ghastly. And we also know that CBN News is going to the Middle East with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Well, Beto O'Rourke looks like a money machine, but he's off to a bumpy start. He got single mothers mad at him when he made a joke about parenting. Well, CBN political correspondent David Brody is going to join us to talk about the 2020 campaign and more. Terry?
Well, while Beto is making headlines and more Democratic candidates are joining the 2020 race, there's one name that's dominating the conversation. As Amber Strong reports, Democrats want Joe Biden to get in the fray.
The ever-widening field of 2020 candidates grew again this weekend, but it was a slip of the tongue from former Vice President Joe Biden that's caught everyone's attention.
I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the anybody who would run.
Friend and Senator Chris Coons adding to the speculation.
Well, I'm very optimistic that Joe Biden will soon formally announce his campaign for the presidency.
A long political career could mean more than a few stumbling blocks for Biden. He's going to have to answer questions on everything from his role in the Anita Hill testimony to his voting record. Polls show, however, he's still the top pick for Democratic voters.
On the whole, the Democratic Party primary electorate will be very satisfied with Joe Biden's record.
New candidate Beto O'Rourke spent the weekend backtracking from verbal gaffes, coming under fire for being insensitive to single parents after joking that his wife does most of the parenting in their home. Meanwhile, Democrats are using President Trump's response to a question on white nationalism to raise questions about his role in violent attacks. The president got the question after the terrorist attack on 2 mosques in New Zealand Friday.
You see today white nationalism as a rising threat around the world.
I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems.
Presidential contender Kirsten Gillibrand, who announced her candidacy Sunday, tweeted, "Time and time again, this president has embraced and emboldened white supremacists. And instead of condemning racist terrorists, he covers for them." Acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney says trying to make this about the president is simply politics.
To simply ask the question every time something like this happens overseas, or even domestically, to say, oh my goodness, it must somehow be the president's fault, speaks to a politicization of everything. Let's take what happened in New Zealand yesterday for what it is, a terrible, evil, tragic act.
Such strong political jabs so early on in the election suggests the closer we get to the campaign, the more heated things will become from both sides. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
Well, joining us now is CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody. And David, it looks like the children have taken over the Democratic Party, and some of the proposals they make is absolutely absurd. But do you think they're going to go for Biden? It looks like that slip of the tongue. He really is outrunning, isn't he?
Yeah, Joe Biden's going to run. He's been called Uncle Joe. There have been a few other terms that have been used for him as well. Look, Biden's going to get in, Pat, and here's the thing with Biden. He is authentic. That's his strength. And here's his weakness. He's authentic. That's part of the problem. He's been a gaffe machine throughout the years when he's run for president. The question is, can you be authentic but not too authentic to the point where you kind of mess yourself up? And that's been Joe Biden's Achilles heel all along. We'll see how he does. I have to tell you, we have a lot to talk about with Joe Biden because he does appeal to that blue-collar Democrat that Donald Trump got in 2016. I think that's going to be real important going forward.
Well, David, you know, they got him for plagiarizing Neil Kinnock in the first time he was out of the box. And he has become now like an elder statesman. He's a real nice guy, and he does appeal to the middle class. Do you think he could beat Trump?
Yes, I think he's the one candidate that can beat Donald Trump. I think a lot of the other candidates are going to have their challenges. But Joe Biden, and here's why he can beat Donald Trump. First of all, as we talked about, he can win back some of those voters that Donald Trump won in 2016. That's really important. Also, look, Donald Trump loves to define everybody, right? Lion Ted, Little Marco, what is it, Crying Chuck? Now Bernie Sanders is the nutty professor. But here's the thing with Biden. You really can't define Biden. He's been around for too long. It's just not going to work. And Biden will, let's be honest, if I can say this, Pat, he'll get in the gutter with Trump if he has to. A lot of those other candidates are going to maybe try to take the high road and not go there. Biden doesn't care. He'll slug it out. And I think the only way to beat Trump is you gotta kind of slug it out with him. Biden's that guy.
Well, what about Beto? Is that just a flash in the pan? Does he have enough substance to go the route?
That's the key question, Pat. He's untested. He has a lot of appeal. He raises money. He is also, when I say authentic, maybe too authentic to the point where, you know, he's already committed a few gaffes along the way. And, of course, Donald Trump trying to already pigeonhole him and kind of define him by talking about his hands, how he uses his hands so much, and that has caught on. So part of the problem with Beto O'Rourke and a lot of these other candidates, too, is that because they haven't been through the rigors, Donald Trump has an open slate to really kind of define who they are. Of course, Beto O'Rourke's going to try to define who he is. Yeah, I think he's got a shot. He's kind of Obama-like, and what I mean by that is that he's able to just kind of wear it on his sleeve, and he's very good at relating to folks, and he raises money, and he does have the it factor. And how do you explain the it factor? Well, that's the thing, Pat. You just don't explain it. You either have it or you don't, and he does have it. But he's untested. I would say this, Pat, let's remember that when it comes to policy, he's going to have to bone up pretty quickly because he hasn't really come to some final conclusions, whether it be Medicare for all or a lot of the socialism programs that many of these Democrats support.
You know, there was an overwhelming vote in the House, I mean, overwhelming, to release the Mueller report. Do you have any insight about when that's going to happen and what it might contain?
Well, I feel like every week we'll talk about it and we'll say, you know, we really think it's coming this week, Pat. Haven't we been saying that for about 3 or 4 months? There are some signs, here we go again, there are some signs that the Mueller report seems to be definitely winding down, could be imminent, could be in the next week or two. Why? There's a guy on the team, on the Mueller team, Andrew Weissman, who is no longer on the team. He's moving on to another project. And so the sense is that if the team, if the gang, is breaking up, then that is a suggestion that indeed there is a winding down process here. So we'll see. Remember, that House resolution you talked about is just that. It doesn't have the force of law, but it is a resolution just in the House. The Senate never took it up, and they won't take it up. And so I think a lot of this is going to be up to Bill Barr, the Attorney General, now to find out what he's going to do. Look, the truth of the matter is even Donald Trump wants this report out there. Why not? And even if a lot of this is obviously coded, or not coded, but veiled in secrecy, it's going to get out there because congressmen are going to leak it. You know, Pat. So eventually it's all going to get out anyhow.
Sure. Well, now I understand you're going to take a little trip. You're going with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to the Middle East. Do you know what he's planning to do?
Right. Well, I think the common theme is going to be Iran. In other words, he's going to be going to 3 different places: Kuwait, Israel, and then Beirut. And we'll be with him. We'll be with him in Kuwait and Israel. We leave later today. And he's going to be talking about the Iranian influence in the region. Obviously, the April 9th elections in Israel just around the corner. So he'll be meeting with Netanyahu. That'll be the big event coming midweek or so, actually Wednesday, in Israel. We'll be there for that. And we also plan to sit down with the Secretary of State in Israel. And so we're looking forward to that as well. But I think what will be interesting in Kuwait will be basically trying, the Secretary of State trying to shore up some of that Kuwaiti influence in the region to make sure that they are on board with everything from a potential Mideast peace plan that could come and, of course, that Iranian influence.
What about Bibi's trials? He's tried to get as close to Trump as he can. He's putting out posters that shows him with the president. That relationship to Bibi is extremely important when he's running against Benny Gantz.
Very important, and you're right. It's funny that you mentioned those posters. It did look like Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump were running together in that April 9th election. It's all over Israel. But what's interesting is that not only will Mike Pompeo be in Israel visiting Netanyahu, but then Netanyahu gets on a plane and comes to the United States, and next week he'll speak at AIPAC, the big pro-Israel lobbying organization. He'll be here to speak in front of the crowd, and so that will make headlines. And you know, it's been a very special relationship between Netanyahu and Trump. I don't think, obviously, that's not going to change. And that gets into all of the anti-Semitism stuff that's coming up with Donald Trump. It's just fascinating to really watch Donald Trump being kind of accused of, you know, everything from the neo-Nazis and the anti-Semitism. And yet Benjamin Netanyahu and him have a wonderful relationship. He's got a Jewish son-in-law, and I can just go down the list. The whole thing's pretty nutty in and of itself.
Well, I'll say to you, David, bon voyage, have a good trip, and we look forward to your report when you get back, okay?
Thanks, Pat. It's a long flight. I just want peanuts on the flight. That's all I ask, or pretzels.
I think they'll feed you better than that on the Secretary's plane. They've got a pretty good chef, I think, on board. I hope for you. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in other news, I want to point out that there were rocket attacks on what was called in the press a settlement. And the settlement is a place called Ariel. And I've been to Ariel. It is a modern city. It has a university that has maybe 25,000 students. It has booming industry. It is a complete town, thousands of people. And I read in the press that there were rocket attacks on a settlement called Ariel. I mean, this is absurd, but it just shows the verbiage that's out there in the press. The press a lot of them don't know what they're talking about, but in that it was amazing. Well, Palestinians in Gaza celebrated after a terrorist killed 2 Israelis on the East Bank. John Jessup has more about that from our CBN News Bureau.
That's right, Pat. A terrorist killed an Israeli soldier and a rabbi in an attack near a Jewish settlement Sunday. It happened in the city of Ariel in the territory of Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. The attacker stabbed the soldier, took his weapon, and shot him to death. He then began spraying cars with gunfire. The rabbi, a father of 12, died from his wounds. Another Israeli is in critical condition. In Gaza, Palestinians handed out sweets to celebrate what one tweet called a heroic morning. Police are on the hunt for the suspect. Well, historic flooding in the nation's Midwest has claimed at least 2 lives, and others are still missing. Nebraska's rivers and dams just couldn't handle the overflow of water from melting snow after last week's bomb cyclone. A highway was cut in half by the floodwaters. One river swelled 17 feet in just 5 days. And the National Guard had to rescue people from their rooftops by helicopter. Meteorologists say more rain is in the forecast for the region on Tuesday. Pat, the Midwest is just in desperate need of a break here.
Unbelievable. I think this is historic. I don't know the exact statistics, but Nebraska is almost 2/3 flooded. It's just been horrible what's happening. The River Platte and some others overflowed. But the thing that I'm looking for, and we're hoping to get a story on it in a few days, the snow melt in the Sierras has been in the question of 10, 15, 20 feet. It's just unprecedented how much snow. And once it begins to warm up and that snow begins to melt, there will be horrible flooding coming down those mountains that will come into Southern California. So the engineers, or U.S. Department of Engineering is looking for something really serious. Dice may break. Sacramento could be flooded. Other places when the Whittier River overflows. So we're going to try to bring you something about that in another few days. But it's really serious matters.